Welcome, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the 6 elements that drive human performance. And with me for this conversation today is Elena Agaragimova. She is a talent management expert. And welcome, Elena. So glad to have you with us today.
I'm excited to chat. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad we're finally doing this.
Yes, I think I've rescheduled this about 5 times, so I appreciate that you were still willing to come on the podcast today. So for our listeners, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story, your career arc, whatever you want to get into.
Yeah, so my story, I think, is very similar to at least some of the people in talent development that I speak with, is that we didn't end up in talent development on purpose necessarily, just kind of happened through life. And so I actually started my career in higher education. I've spent the first kind of beginning of my professional career really working university campuses, then doing executive MBA programs and working with professionals there. And then naturally, I was like, well, what's next? And naturally next was to say, well, I'm already working with these professionals that are doing their executive MBAs. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go into corporate space. So then I kind of shifted towards corporate learning and training and facilitating. So I kind of wore multiple hats under the umbrella of talent in the corporate space. And then I said, well, what's next? And then I was like, well, I really want to do something on my own. So I kind of went off and did my own independent consulting and training work. Was really blessed to come across some amazing individuals who, wanted to start a business with me. So I've started a couple of businesses in this space, really focusing on performance and well-being in organizations. So that's kind of who I am, and we can dive deeper into any part of it as the conversation goes along. And I'm really passionate about talent. I'm really passionate about performance, and how do we connect these things together and really get to the root cause of what drives human performance.
Awesome. And I love the kind of mixture of internal and external experience that you bring. So we can probably bring a little bit of both lenses to the conversation. So what, today we were going to talk about the 6 elements that drive human performance. So where did this come about as a focus area for you, and where do you want to start?
Yeah. So throughout my career, something else that I guess good for context is that I've always been kind of a nut about wellness in general. Part of it is because I grew up with a family of athletes who it's like when we talk about performance and best, it's all about like all the other aspects. It's not about just when you show up on the field or the track or wherever it is. It's really, what do you do before that? And then as I spend my life in kind of corporate learning, I was like, well, this kind of applies. And we've seen a lot of research come out, like how do you apply, experience in the fitness and sports to corporate fitness, essentially, right? And so, and in recent years, there's been more and more research coming out and literature around what actually drives human performance. And we're no longer, just kind of checking in, checking out on our jobs. We actually want to make sure it's bringing out the best in us. We want to make sure we're surrounded by the team that supports us. We want to make sure it's the right environment for us. And at the same time, we want to make sure we're not losing sleep. So like all these different components that actually feed into us being at our best, which by default then makes everything else around us better, including the work that we do, right? And so that's kind of the background. The 6 elements and why we kind of chose those, I have to give a lot of credit to my business partner, Jordana Cole, who actually comes from a really research-based and academic environment, as well as business kind of experience of what really drives that performance. So there's a lot of different elements and different research or different things, but 6 elements that we kind of focus on are the following, which is, again, based on research and literature. We think this is really important for the corporate space. And those elements are career, those elements are environment, purpose, health. This includes physical and physical health and mindset, relationships, and mindset. So these are the 6 elements that we believe kind of really are the root of what drives performance in organizations and individuals, of course. So anyway, I'll pause here.
Yeah. Run those down for me one more time. I'm taking notes.
Yep. So we got mindset.
Mindset. Yep.
We got career. We got health, relationships, environment, and the 6th one is purpose.
Nice. Cool. So
and maybe it might be worth also to define, because I think everybody also defines them slightly different. So maybe as we talk about this, I'll kind of share the definition just to make sure we're kind of all aligned on, what are we actually talking about for each element.
Yeah, let's do that. And I think as we look at each one too, right? I think there's different places for, I think leaders in a corporate environment, HR folks in a corporate environment, there's probably easy places where we see certain programs that companies either bring in to measure or improve in some of these areas, whether or not it's intentionally focused on these six elements in an
Yeah.
intentional way, it still might be focused in another way, like employee engagement, for example, I think touches a fair number of these things. Um, so yeah, let's define and even talk about what people are doing there. One thing that that I want to kind of ask about first though is it feels like well-being in the workplace has had this like ebb and flow of um, how do I say popularity might be the wrong word, but
Yeah.
this ebb
D
and
whatever.
flow of popularity maybe over the last I want to say 5 maybe 10 years. Um, so where do you see from and maybe it's an umbrella term here or it nests in here somewhere, but how is it that you see well-being, playing in and why is it important for organizations to address well-being?
Yeah, and before I dive into that, I also want to point out that I love that you said that some of these elements already we see in like employee engagement surveys,
Mm-hmm.
and so the whole actually idea behind this is that we do employee engagement surveys, right? Which are usually once a year. Most people lie on them, are not completely honest with them. The data is collected. HR people are overwhelmed with the amount of data that's there, and they don't really know what to do with that. And it's very
Mm-hmm.
specific to like point in time of how do you feel about a particular question or topic in that employee engagement survey. So that's that. Then you have kind of like leadership assessments, right? Like we want our leaders to be at our best and so on. But those are also very specific to like a career element, if we want to call it that. And so, and the whole idea behind the six elements and why we're looking at it from this holistic point of view is because it's not just one thing that drives employee engagement, that drives performance, that drives retention. It's actually a combination of these things, and we're looking at them as silos, and that's the core issue. Instead of looking at it holistically, instead we're just got a bunch of silos, a bunch of tools that we're trying to solve these problems with, and it doesn't work. And being internal, I get sold tools all the time, and it's like that's solving one thing. It's going to add, new tool exhaustion to my team because I have to introduce yet another tool to solve a problem that's just putting band-aids on broken legs when the actual core issues are these kind of six elements that actually drive us. So anyway, so that's just
Yeah.
a quick thing on that.
No, that's while you're on that, I would say, depending on where your organization is from a maturity perspective, if you want to think about it that way,
Mhm.
um, with how they leverage employee engagement surveys or the kinds of questions they're even asking, some companies might be asking questions that touch all six of these, or they might be asking questions that touch maybe four, but like career, like career is one where most engagement surveys at this point ask certain questions around, I feel like I, can have a thriving career here or something to that effect. Fewer I would say some of the companies I've worked for have and some haven't. And again, I think this has to do with like the ebb and flow of well-being in the workplace. Some might ask about like, I have a close friend here at work, right? But many aren't asking, about broader relationships at work other than the relationship with your manager. Most are asking questions about environment, some kind of get at purpose, right? So
Yeah.
just trying to validate a little bit of what you're saying here, which is, I think we're taking a haphazard approach that probably could come together under, easily could come together under these six elements.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess the comment I have on that is that when even these engagement surveys, the challenge is that it's not personalized. So it's not like you get like as an employee. The reason that employee engagement surveys usually have really low completion rates and they're not really accurate is because people are like, what's in it for me? And that's because whatever is evaluated is all about what the company can do with that information. But it's
Right.
like nobody comes back to you and it's like, Kent,
Yeah.
here's some, there's the gaps that we've seen, right? And etc. Like, here's how we can help you close those gaps. They're not personalized. And that's the issue with that, right? It's just a bunch of that's collected, and that's but yeah,
Yeah,
it's
engagement is an individual thing. It's individualized, right? Same
yeah.
as people's career goals and career aspirations. Those are completely individualized. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, but let's dive into your original
Yeah.
question, which is around well-being and kind of like why is it important? And you know what? That's a good question because I'm like, why? Like it's crazy that we're asking it because it's like, well, it should always been important, but it hasn't been historically important. And I think because historically we worked very differently, I think we're now in a space where we have to do more with less. And the way we put it is like, we want you to do better with less. We don't want you to just do more with less. We want you to do better, right? And how do you do better with less? Is by making sure that all your systems are working. And that system starts with you as the human system. And so all of these different elements play into that. And we know that, now again, with all the research that's coming out in recent years, when you don't sleep well, you're not at your best, you're not creative, your EQ is down, you're not going to be empathetic. You're not going to ask good questions of your clients or your team members, right? If you're not eating well, if you don't feel that you have purpose or value aligned with your work, if your personal values are not aligned with the values of the company, it's exhausting. And so what's happening is that if we don't consider these pieces, which are all well-being, right? If you don't consider these pieces in your organization, you're going to have a workforce that is disengaged, burnt out, right? They're not progressing and you're not getting the best out of them. So you as an organization will probably just, cease to exist eventually because we can no longer sustain organizations that don't develop their people, that don't invest in well-being, right? And so before we could get away with it, and now we just cannot. And I mean, I could try to take stabs of why that is. There's numerous reasons. Part of it is generational, right? Gen Z is like, nope, I'm all about wellness and well-being, right? And it's just people are just waking up a little bit more to also like, hey, there's a lot more that I can do with my time. Like, hey, like there's a lot of things that I now have better understanding of what drives me. There's opportunity. So I think there's just a lot of things that influencing this drive. But ultimately, it's just good for business. So I don't mean to sound like it's like wishy-washy, like, oh, well-being and companies should care. No, it's like a true business metric because your business will not survive if people are not creative, if they're not innovating, if they're not energetic, right? So this is why they should care ultimately,
Mm.
because it's, even if you're a kind of leader who's like, listen, I just want people to do their work. Well, guess what? They do their work when they're at their best.
Yeah.
And you do have some input on like how to help people be at their best.
Yeah. I love that because I know for me, right, I'll just comment on myself. I've really corrected like my sleep habits in the last 2, 3 years, for example. And especially in the last 12 months, gotten even better. And it's like, gosh, when I started sleeping 7 or 8 hours a night, I started to realize how grumpy I was, prior to that, for example. So just little things around, how you are taking care of yourself and how does that actually affect your day overall, let alone your performance at a company, right? So yeah, I can see, here it would behoove a company to pay some attention to what can they do to support well-being because they'll benefit from it, right?
Mhm.
So, well, and I'm sure we could keep diving in more esoterically on well-being as a whole, but let's dive into some of these items. So I know I wrote them down in a certain order, but what order do you want to tackle them in?
Let's start with mindset. That's the first one here for me. So let's do mindset because I also feel I feel all of them important. All of them are important. And just to be clear, like it's not like they don't like it's not in any particular order. Each person is prioritizes each element differently and so on, depending on where they are and so on in their life and career. So, and also I want to be realistic, like, sometimes like even with the career element, for example, right? Like sometimes you're not always going to be truly aligned with your career, but it's like maybe there's a period in your life, it's just a season in your life where the focus is on something else. It could be on those relationships, it could be on the health, right? So I don't want people to think like, oh, I need to be excellent in all these things. And I don't want organizations to think you need to have all these solutions to all these elements. It's more about just awareness and helping people understand. And how are you as L&D and HR investing resources where they actually will drive performance versus just buying a bunch of tools that don't work and just wasting time and money for everybody. So
Well,
I just want.
and I'd wager some of them might just be showing up naturally through the culture that's evolved, at your company and are not taking necessarily a bunch of intentional effort, right? So there's probably a bit of, what's lacking that needs the intentional effort because some of these we might have just gotten good at accidentally or with some level of intention that doesn't take the effort anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we dive into it, I think what could be helpful, and depends on how much time we have. We'll go through like a couple of, 2 or 3 of them, and I think people kind of get an understanding. And I can always follow up with like a little resource they can have access to. We have a little white paper actually that's really brilliant. People can just download it and read through all of these different things. And so what's I think helpful when I talk on this topic is really understanding how we defined it, and then like what symptoms show up for organizations, like if that element is lacking in your organization, and then some things you can be asking yourself as an L&D professional. So, so let's start with the mindset, and I'm going to just look at my notes because my chief officer is going to listen to this, and if I don't define them exactly how to define, I'm going to get in trouble, and I always, put my
There'll
own
be a
spin.
performance conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so the mindset is really ultimately determining how employees respond during uncertainty, right? So it shows up as how adaptable they are, how resilient they are, and how willing they are to learn. And so if people kind of feel empowered, they obviously going to navigate that change better. So some of the symptoms that companies might see this come out in the organization is like, our leaders I can't even pronounce the word, but our leaders making a really negative connotations with challenges, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
if a change is coming,
Things.
that's the word. Yes, I cannot pronounce it. So, like, are they making a catastrophe, or are they really kind of leading through that change, right? Or are they operating at a state of fear? So that's like a symptom that mindset elements probably lacking in some of that, right? Another thing is like resistance to change. When organizations, obviously it's natural to be resistant to change, but is it like so bad where it's very difficult and it's causing so much disruption to your people? That could also be another symptom, right? So, if somebody's listening to it, they're like, you know what, our people are extremely resistant and like a lot of pushback and a lot of kind of conversations. So the questions I would ask is, one, from a leadership perspective, do your managers know how to actually have these difficult conversations with their team members? Are they, how do they, making sure they're not operating out of the state of fear, right? And making sure they can do that. Do your policies and leadership behavior actually encourage growth or fear? Right? Do you have a bunch of people who are like, we want to stick to doing things the way we used to doing things? It works. We don't want to change. It's not going to impact us, etc. Right? So do you actually have policies and are you having regular conversations around these topics to promote that growth mindset, if you want to call it that? Right? And then also, how are we empowering employees? Do we talk about these topics? Right? Do we, kind of share that across board? Do people understand that they can be vulnerable and share if they have fears and so on? Because that is part of growth, right? Or is everybody just kind of like, waiting for the worst things to happen? So anyway, I'll pause here, but that's kind of around the mindset thing.
Well, I think what stands out to me, and I'm going to be curious how much this ends up feeding into the other 5, because what you said here about, you kind of started with leaders. Are leaders, catastrophizing things, and are they causing, churn and fear and things like that? So I think my question being, gosh, if we zoom out, how much of the focus needs to be on getting our, getting these elements right with our leaders and how they're leading and because of the impact that they can have on the workforce, so to speak.
No, you're spot on. Absolutely. I think it's, we've seen this, over numerous case studies across organizations. The famous phrase, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers, right? I personally have been blessed with having some great leaders in my life. But I see what good leadership looks like, and it's crazy to feel when it's a bad leader and you're like, oh my gosh, and it's so impactful to you. And I think there is a little bit of not to sound kind of negative, but I think there is a little bit of lack of great leadership in organizations, which is, it's, and I don't want to put everything on the managers. I don't think it's necessarily the manager's fault. Yeah. I think it's a combination of factors, and part of it is because managers are managing on average more people than ever before, right? They're doing more with less, essentially, and they're not doing better. And so, and they're so overwhelmed in meetings. So I think it is a system issue as well, like or from a whole perspective. So I don't want to put all the blame on the managers, but there is a responsibility of really understanding how do you push back as a manager and so on. So to answer your question, yes, there's a huge portion of this that's around management, and it's a little bit disheartening to see how so many young people don't want to go into management, at least in some of the organizations that I've worked in, where they're like, I don't want to be stressed out like person X, who's my manager right now, I don't want to have to deal with all the drama, all the politics. And that's not what management is about. Like, management is actually a really rewarding piece of your job. If you think about it, if it's done right, it can be super rewarding. It can be super energizing. But if it's done poorly, this is what happens. And so, so yeah, I think there's definitely needs to be a big focus on managers, but also like systems, right? And I think we're just reactive as a society, as businesses. Many businesses are very reactive, which again, understandable. There's a lot of things happening, but I think the future is going to depend. The companies that are going to survive in the future are going to be those that are essentially just have their nervous systems checked, right? As individuals, like, how is your nervous system doing? Are you calm, cool, and collected? Or are you just operating out of fear and you're just blowing up the whole business because you're not taking care of yourself as a leader? And ultimately, obviously, people make up organizations. So I think, that's my thoughts on management.
Nice.
Yeah.
I want to dive into relationships next, just because I think I'm curious. Words matter, so I'm curious what you mean by relationships and what's an organization's responsibility there.
Yeah, so this really goes back to how much are we actually creating space for people to build relationships across our organization. So that goes with the manager, first and foremost. That goes as far as like onboarding, right? I think that's a big challenge. A lot of companies do it well. Some companies can do it better. Onboarding, that's when the first time that the person is actually entering your organization. So how much you're actually helping them build those relationships internally goes back to your question. I mean, to your point earlier when you said in piece of the engagement services, do I have friends at work? Right? You don't need to be best friends or too friendly with people, but like, do I feel like I have friends at work? That's super important to our relationships, right? And so we know statistically that, a lot of people, when we ask them, how do you view relationships at work? And those that say, I have great relationships at work, they actually tend to stay longer, they're more productive, and they're more engaged, right? So that's just a fact. And that goes back to our human nature. We're social and social creatures. We want to be connected. And so the question here becomes is, especially if you're virtual, or if you're a hybrid company, how are you creating spaces and opportunities for people to connect in a way that is meaningful? So that's another thing, right? Like, there's a lot of things that you can do, but does it work for your team? And the challenge I have for people who are listening is like, have you asked your team what works for them? Have you experimented? Because I think there's a lot of companies that do a lot of things. And if you ask the people like, I don't really care about that little thing that we do, right? So actually asking, what do you guys want to see? Right? Does it make sense to do company-wide? Does it make sense to do project-wise, depending on the organizational setup, right? So understanding what works for your organization is super, super important here. And if your organization is struggling with this, symptom that you'll see is there's going to be very siloed operations, people hogging information, right? Because they don't have those relationships. There's no trust within that organization, right? Interpersonal conflicts might happen that will scale to your HR, which is not what should be happening. It should be dealt on the ground with that person or within the team. So these are kind of some of the symptoms that people will see if the relationship element is a little bit lacking.
Yeah. Interestingly, in my experience, two things, right? Like, one, we know from engagement surveys that the relationship with your manager is huge, right? But also, and it's been a while since I've read any of the particulars around it, but I remember having a workplace bestie or having your workplace spouse, right? Like, having at least one close enough relationship at work matters. But I would also say, from my time with leadership development programming, over the last 10 years, as we've surveyed people about what are they appreciating, what are they not appreciating, what do they want or need out of their programming, what were the best elements, what do we keep folding in? Consistently over probably, I'd go beyond that and say, the 20 plus years of my career here, one of the things that comes out is the opportunities that we create when we're even just bringing leaders together from across a company for a program, the opportunities that we create for them to just connect and network, whether that's working together on something that we're doing in a workshop or whether it's an intentional lunch, dinner, happy hour that's baked in, like the value that the employee, that we hear time and time again, that the employees are putting on that opportunity because, and here's where I'm going with it is, and I think part of what you were saying about, the virtual and the hybrid environment. But I'd say it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that too. It's you have to put intentional effort into creating those opportunities, right? And I'll point at virtual and hybrid work to say it's the perfect example of if you don't proactively create the opportunity to connect, especially with virtual employees, it's not going to happen, right? And so it's like, gosh, it took a $20,000 to $90,000 leadership development program to put these leaders in a room together, and gosh, they're really valuing it. You don't. Maybe we can find ways that we don't need to spend that kind of money to just get people connected.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many ways to do this, right? And I think at the end of the day, I'm a huge fan of in-person in general. I know it's not feasible for all the companies, but again, I think it just comes down to priorities, and I think it comes down to resources and where you're spending your budgets. And listen, I as internally and being somebody external, I know how much companies are spending on different initiatives, and I bet you if you just audit where you're spending your money and where it could be spent best, you could probably create more of those experiences for your people, right? So again, I'll give you an example. Like even some companies that have, so one of the companies I worked with in the past, like they have people all across the U.S., right? So it's like, even like, do you have like a hub of, let's say you have a bunch of people that are based in Florida, a bunch of people placed in Colorado. Can you get them together, sponsor a dinner for them, right? It doesn't need to be something crazy or heavy. It doesn't need to be a heavy program. It could just be a gathering together, right? And then in specific pockets where your people are. For the leadership, I think it's super important because we forget about leaders and we always expect so much of them, but they're also human and they also need support. And they're the most, especially like the middle managers, they're the most neglected group. They're just in the middle, squished from the top and the bottom and the sides. And being in the room together just to address like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. How are you addressing that in your group? Just to hear like some perspectives. That's what matters. It's less about even the content that you share versus the facilitation of the discussions where they come up with their own solutions. That is where the value is, and that's where it sticks. Not yet another PowerPoint presentation.
Well, and not that we're even necessarily talking about L&D and leadership development, as a whole in our conversation today, but let me pick on, e-learning for a moment, right? The biggest thing that got lost in the big e-learning craze was the actual connection of leaders, right? And I would say that doesn't mean you need to throw out the e-learning. What it might mean is you need to add in the learning circles, right? Or the peer coaching groups where everybody go do this same 2-hour, bit by bit module over the next 2 weeks, but we're going to get together and talk about it. And that's the piece that I think was missing. All right. Well, watching the time, I want to make sure we at least briefly get to all 6 if we can. Yep. It's a challenge. Sure. But I want to ask about, I think probably the stickier one, unless you feel like we already maybe talked about it. Because I feel like career, environment, purpose, we probably can hit pretty quickly. Yeah. But what about health? Like, let's talk about that for a moment. Because I would say if I'm
biased about health.
Yeah, if I'm a company, I'm thinking at least like, well, hey, I'm providing health insurance. Health is on them, right? So like, where do organizations need? Let me not even try to lead the witness here. What are your thoughts on health and why it's on this list?
Yeah, I love this one. I'm really biased towards this. And part of it is because I've hit burnout twice, because I tend to be like a go-getter type of person. So I think that's another thing to mention in the health. So let me define health element before I go into people you might be overlooking in this element. So we often overlook health because, like you said, we outsource it. But and listen, there's 2 responsible parties. I am the first to say yes. People need to take care of their health and so on. But then also as an organization, right, like what are the benefits you're providing for them? And a lot of times companies are like, here's a Fitbit and a yoga mat and we've done our job. Versus looking at going to processes and systems. So an example could be, if you're looking at just like your managers, for example, which are burnt out, overwhelmed, and so on, that as the majority of your company most likely, how much are we actually packing them with meetings? So we have such high expectations of managers. They're in meetings 5, 6, 7 hours a day. Then at the same time, they need to do whatever they need to do for their contributions on an individual level. Then they need to make sure they take care of other people. Who's taking care of them? And can you create better systems in your organization to say, do we really need 6 hours of meetings every day? And if we do, that's a problem. So it's like, going back to the root cause versus like, well, this person needs to learn how to delegate. Did you make it available for them to delegate? Did you create the space? Did you do the training? And so on. So there's a lot of that going back to the manager and like how much are we supporting the manager? Because a lot of managers, I think statistically, like managers will spend 10 years in a career. 75% of them will spend 10 years in the career before they get any kind of management, leadership, people management training. That's a problem, right? And usually managers are promoted and because they've done really good, and then nobody really talks to them about what it means to manage because it's a very different mindset that you now have to put on. So that's a whole other conversation. So yes, so that's
I
one.
forgot about that statistics. I'm really glad you threw that out. That most people don't get leadership development of any kind for the first 10 years of leading. It's crazy.
Exactly. And we just kind of expect that they're going to be great, and it's a very different mindset. And so as an organization, you're responsible to creating space for people to be at their, like creating the best habits and so on. One example is I was working with a manager and he would send out emails at like 2 a.m. or like 6 a.m. And it's like, that starts to create a little bit of anxiety to your team members. Like, listen, I'm a person who is up at 5 a.m. I'm annoying, etc. I'm tempted to send emails. You know what I do? I just schedule them for like a normal person after 9 a.m. or something like that. Like, don't overwhelm people because, and so on. So I think that's one. Two is, our people are, one of the symptoms you can watch out in your company if this element is lacking is, are people calling out sick all the time, right? Is there absenteeism? Like, are people just kind of checked out? Do you have people that used to be really excited about something and asking questions or questioning things, because that's also healthy to be able to challenge situations in a company, and all of a sudden they're quiet, right? Are your best managers are just kind of like, not really engaged, right? Because that's another thing to remember is that even if people who are high performers, they also need taken care of from a well-being standpoint because they tend to burn themselves out more than anybody. So for them, it's also a different approach, right? So really just, again, like observing symptoms. And I think it's very simple, actually. It doesn't even cost any money. Just taking a moment to observe and to think about each team member on your team as a leader or, in an HR, like helping leaders understand how to look for these symptoms. And it's just observations. Have I noticed this person is a little bit more detached than they normally are? And it's really just a little bit of awareness. It doesn't even take a lot. And so I think as HR and L&D leaders, it's like, how are we actually equipping managers to recognize symptoms? And do we recognize these symptoms in them?
How are we paying attention as leaders and bringing a level of curiosity to say, hey, what's going on? You don't seem like you're at your best. What's happening, right? Yeah. Well, let's. I'm going to push us, right? I'm going to push us along. So let's talk career. I know I've had a lot of focus in that area in my time, but what's the focus area when it comes to these 6 elements?
Yeah. So for the career is really just, people want to know, do they have a future in your company? And here's where I kind of changed my mind a little bit on certain aspects, because I think part of the career is like, do you have clear career paths? Do you have clear expectations set for the people? And I think that's good to have, but also I'm recognizing that especially in recent months, those are becoming really blurry lines of like what career growth looks like and what because it's so fluid right now with everything that's happening. And we see a lot of the generalist expectations, meaning we want people to kind of really be shifty in terms of, being able to shift their priorities and how they work and upskilling and reskilling and all those things. So I think that's changing a little bit. But I think if you are an organization, maybe a little bit smaller and you don't yet have defined clear paths, or maybe the business growth drives career growth, which is usually true for a lot of SMEs, right? Small, medium-sized businesses. If there's no business growth, like there's no growth for employees, right? So I think if that's the case, then just being honest and saying, hey, I'm not sure what this looks like, but here's what we're doing. Here's what's in the pipeline. But tell me, what is interesting to you? What are some activities that are driving your energy? What are some things that are draining you? How, what are some areas that you think you want to experiment with or try? Because I think that's another thing. We tend to put people in boxes when it comes to career. And I think the world of work is demanding that we're actually looking at people from different lenses and discovering that actually they're not just a computer scientist. They actually have this creative piece to them that they can do something else and so on. So it's like really uncovering what is it that people, want out of their career growth, being honest and transparent if you don't yet know what that looks like, and helping them understand, where they can potentially pivot if a pivot is required. So.
Well, and I'm going to drop a name, and then I'm going to try to pick it up off the floor right away, which is, I had Mark Efron on, and one of the things he was talking about is we need to think about what is the deal that we're offering to people based on, are they someone who wants to grow and develop and climb the ladder, so to speak, or how have we intentionally carved out space for expertise too, right? There's people who, I got to the level I'm at, I really like what I'm doing. I just want to keep knocking home runs from my current role. I don't want the next role. And are we actually supporting the rewards and recognition for people who are not ascending in their career? Because it's not for everybody, right? And I think it's easy for managers. It's easy for, I would argue, early career HR folks to kind of think of everyone as wanting to climb the ladder, and it's just not the case, right? So yeah, how are we helping people see that they have career opportunity with whatever that means for them? But also, I think what you were kind of getting at here too is that doesn't mean you stop developing. So how are we also helping you grow and develop, even if it's from within your seat, not necessarily toward the next role per se?
Yeah.
And I'd imagine purpose, probably has a strong connection here. So help me kind of segue into, purpose, because I bet part of it is what's purpose for me, but also then connecting to company purpose, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I think purpose goes back to the famous book by Simon Sinek, the why, right?
Mm-hmm.
So literally understanding why do you work? Aside, of course, the financials, and sometimes that's enough. Like, I want to be also realistic. Sometimes people just work because their skill set is really valuable and they can make a living, and that's perfect, right? And then sometimes those people, they find purpose outside of work and so on. That's absolutely fine. But at least they're aware that I'm just doing this job. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I'm really good and I'm getting money, and that's all good. And for other people, it's like being part of something larger, being part of, specific organizations that, I don't know, transforming the world, choose your topic type thing, So I think just understanding, helping people kind of align those two. And I think this is where, for individuals, it's really important to have that. But this is where in your onboarding, in your recruitment, right, as HR, this is where you want to make sure that you're communicating that the why of the company, the values, and making sure it's aligned with the values and the whys of the person, and making sure that before they even join your organization, it's pretty clear. And I think this is where we can do a better job for sure. Right. And this kind of moves the person away from just being compliant and doing what they need to do to actual commitment. And that will drive retention, that will drive creativity, because they bought into the why of the company. And then in order for them to be able to do that, and you need to have that conversation, you need to have a clear mission and values of you as a company. And then how are you actually communicating these values? Or as I remember, it was like a joke, and it's like, well, we just put it on the paper, and what is it called, the tissue paper box. Our values are right there, they're on a tissue paper. Like, that's not how you communicate values. Like, how are you actually, what are the behaviors that leadership are showing, the HR is showing, to communicate these values from the very beginning of the engagement with that employee, right? From the onboarding, from the recruitment conversation, and so on. Because I think these are so important, and that's where we get our essentially energy. Like, purpose drives us, right? That's what drives us. That's what keeps us going when we're you have to remember your why. Why am I doing this? Oh yes, that's why. Okay, and then you push through these things, through the bad days and the hard days at work, which we all have.
Yeah. All right, really quick, environment.
Environment. Yeah, so environment is really around part of it is systems and processes that we already touched upon, right? Yeah. But also the how essentially you communicate across the company, right? If you're in a remote environment, how are you creating those spaces and so on? And an example would be, I'll give an example. So an example is also like how and where people work. Understanding what do people need to be, where do they need to work to be, what kind of environment they need to be at their best. So an example would be with the whole RTO, return to work, right? A lot of companies, like, everybody needs to come back, and it's like, well, does everybody need to come back? Or maybe your engineers or software developers that actually need very focused space, maybe they need to work at home some days, right? Because it's very hard for them to connect, or it's very easy for them to get distracted in the office and so on. Or if you're going to bring them back to the office, are you going to put them in the open space as they had before? Or maybe you need to think about creating really insulated spaces for them where they can focus and do their work, because that's where they actually do their best work, and that's what they need. And if anybody's worked with software developers, which I have, they just need uninterrupted, like, flow state focus mode. And once you interrupt them, it's like you just wasted half of their day for them to get re-engaged. So that's the kind of environment things we're talking about, right? It's like, it's physical, it's cultural, and how we create that.
Yeah, a lot of companies are starting to call this ways of working in order to kind of encompass both the decision rights, how we communicate, where we work, right? And kind of all those things. So before I shove us into the advice column, how are you consulting or working with organizations around this holistic picture?
Yeah, so this is where we actually have an assessment that we've designed very, very carefully that actually looks at these 6 elements and gives people like a gap analysis. And what we do with that is then we provide like a really nice kind of overview and picture of like, here's some gaps that your people are experiencing, and really working with organizations trying to, audit what they're doing right now. How can they best close those gaps? What are some symptoms that are showing up in your organization where you see that? And that's how we look at it from a holistic point of view, because I think that's where it's at. I think gone are the days where we just focus on like very specific things, because as budgets get more smaller, as we're doing more with less and so on, we just want to help people do better with less through some of these diagnostics that we do.
Yeah. Well, and I'd wager this should be competitive with the dollar spend space of engagement, because right, I would say oftentimes engagement surveys can be used to either break our arms, patting ourselves on our own back around like how we measure against a benchmark, or how one function within a company measures against the company average or others. And I find that the comparisons that we end up trying to do in engagement surveys take away from the message of, but what is your data saying that you need to focus on, versus, well, at least we're better than marketing, right? Like, or whatever, that can happen. So, well, I wish we could talk longer. I'm pretty committed to this being what I call a one-way commute listen. So maybe we'll have to have you back on again sometime in the future, but I'm going to shove us right into the advice column. So I ask everybody to come prepared with 2 to 3 pieces of advice. So I'll say the first one is, what's your advice for leaders out there that they can take and start implementing right away?
Yeah, I think just, looking at, as people kind of listen to this and reflecting on your own elements, starting with yourself, like, what is the element that needs the most attention to you right now as an individual? I think as an HR professional, what is the element that you feel is lacking in your organization that is causing the most friction in your organization? Right? And how can you, address it, discuss it, like create a plan for it in the next 90 days? Like, what would that look like? And the other piece is like really auditing where you're currently spending energy, time, and resources. And if you're like, listen, this is not the time to invest in new things, then just looking at auditing that and then asking your employees, like, what do they actually want? Because I think we forget to ask that. And you can do this in small groups and specific groups, it's depending on the organization, but just asking people, what do they actually want out of these different tools and engagement surveys or whatever you're putting out there. So I think these 2 things.
Nice. Well, you hit exactly on the second piece of advice that I was going to ask you for, which is, what about those who support, leaders like HR, right? And so I think what you're saying here is, hey, leaders, take a look at this and ask yourself, where am I lacking? What do I need to focus on? And if you're supporting leaders, ask yourself, right, where is the system lacking here? And I would say, The assessment sounds really exciting for me. So I might be forcing the last piece of it, the last like grab bag element here, which is if people are interested in exploring, assessing these elements, working with you or your company, where can they find you? What would you want to leave our listeners with, if they're interested in this area?
Yeah. So if they can just find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place, Elena Agaragimova. And if they mention this podcast that they heard on this, I'll give them the assessment for free.
Oh,
and it has tied to it, so they can even have an AI coach for
awesome.
a full year of access. So if they mention it, I'll give them the assessment for free that they can try out.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes. This time went really fast. Elena, thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks for hanging in with my about 1001 reschedules to get us here today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Take it easy.